Ethan Voss had worked on many spaceships before, but never one like this. The Zirac Dominion's battleship was a massive, steel-gray fortress floating in the dark void of space. It was built for war, covered in heavy armor and energy cannons that could destroy entire fleets. The Zirac were known as ruthless warriors, rarely allowing outsiders aboard their ships, especially humans. But Ethan wasn't just any human. He was an engineer, a specialist in advanced technology, chosen to be part of a rare diplomatic exchange. His job was simple: observe, learn, and assist if needed. He wasn't here to fight. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He was just here to do his job. That's why he was surprised when an urgent summons arrived, delivered by two towering Zirac guards. "You must report to the command deck." Immediately, one of them growled in his deep, rumbling voice. Ethan frowned. He had been working on a minor power fluctuation in the ship's thruster controls when they interrupted him. He wiped the grease from his hands and looked at them carefully. Zirac warriors never explained themselves unless they had to. Something about this felt strange. "Did something happen?" Ethan asked. "Commander Xilara has requested your presence," the guard replied stiffly. "You will come now." Ethan hesitated but knew better than to refuse. A direct order from the commander was no small thing. Xilara was the highest-ranking officer on this ship, and from what Ethan had seen, she was nothing like the other Zirac warriors. She was taller, stronger, and more disciplined, with sharp violet eyes that seemed to see through anyone who stood before her. He followed the guards through the long, metallic corridors of the battleship. The Zirac crew members barely spared him a glance as they marched past, their armor clanking against the steel floor. The air smelled of machine oil and metal, a scent Ethan had grown familiar with after years of working on spacecraft. When they finally reached the command deck, the guards stepped aside, letting Ethan walk in alone. The room was large, filled with holographic displays, control panels, and high-ranking officers standing at attention. At the center of it all stood Commander Xilara. She turned slowly, her gaze locking onto Ethan. Her expression was unreadable, calm, but not friendly. "You are the human engineer," she stated. It wasn't a question. Ethan cleared his throat. "Yes, Commander." There was a brief silence. Then, in a voice that was both firm and commanding, Xilara said something that made Ethan freeze. "Human, you must inspect me." For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. What?" Xilara took a step forward. The other officers in the room didn't react at all, as if this was completely normal. But to Ethan, nothing about this situation felt normal. "You are a specialist in mechanical and biological systems," she continued. "You have been trained to identify irregularities. You will inspect me now." Ethan stared at her, trying to make sense of the request. Was this some kind of Zirac custom? Some strange ritual? He had studied their culture, but nothing like this had ever been mentioned. "Commander," he said carefully, "I'm not a doctor. I specialize in ships, not people." Xilara narrowed her eyes. "You are a human. Your kind observes details others do not. That is why I am requesting you." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her voice, something almost urgent. He glanced around the room, noticing that some of the officers were watching him closely. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about an inspection. Still, he had no choice but to obey. "All right," he said, stepping forward. "I'll take a look." As he approached, Xilara remained still, watching him like a hawk. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Was she injured? Was there a problem with her armor? Or was this something far more dangerous? He just hoped he would figure it out before it was too late. Ethan took a slow breath as he stepped closer to Commander Xilara. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer uncertainty of the situation. The Zirac were warriors, trained for battle and discipline. They never showed weakness, never asked for help. So why was Xilara, one of their most respected commanders, asking him, a human engineer, to inspect her? His eyes scanned her from head to toe. She stood tall in her dark metallic armor, her violet eyes focused on him like a hunter observing prey. Her posture was perfect, strong, and unwavering. But Ethan noticed one small thing: a slight tension in her shoulders, a stiffness in her stance. Something was wrong. "I'll need to know what I'm looking for," Ethan said cautiously. Silara's expression remained unreadable. "You must observe and identify the issue yourself." Ethan exhaled. Figures. She wasn't going to make this easy. He glanced at the Zurich officers around them, all standing at attention, their faces completely neutral. It was as if this situation was perfectly normal. But it wasn't. He decided to start simple. "If you're asking for an inspection, then that means you suspect something is wrong," Ethan reasoned. "Is it physical pain? A mechanical issue with your armor? Fatigue?" Silara's jaw tightened, but she gave no answer. Ethan frowned. "All right. If she won't tell me, I'll have to figure it out myself." He stepped around her, scanning her armor for any visible damage. Zurich technology was far more advanced than human designs. Their suits were equipped with energy shields, adaptive plating, and even medical systems that could heal minor injuries. Yet, despite all that, she still called him here. His fingers hovered over a small control panel on her forearm. "May I?" he asked. Silara gave a small nod. Ethan pressed a button, and the armor let out a hiss as the plating loosened slightly. A diagnostic display appeared, showing her vitals, energy levels, and suit integrity. His eyes widened. There it was. "There's a power fluctuation in your suit," he murmured. "It's unstable." Silara didn't react, but Ethan knew this wasn't a small problem. Zurich armor was designed to be perfectly synchronized with its wearer. If the system wasn't stable, it meant the armor was malfunctioning, or the wearer was. Ethan glanced up at her. "How long have you been feeling this?" Silara hesitated for the first time. 3 cycles. 3 days. Ethan's mind raced. If the commander of a Zurich warship had been operating at less than full strength for 3 days, that was a huge risk. Why hadn't she reported it? Why hadn't the officers around her done something? Unless they already knew. Ethan glanced at the other Zurich officers, but none of them reacted. They were hiding something. "Your body isn't sensing with the armor," Ethan said slowly. "That means one of 2 things. Either your suit is damaged, or your body is rejecting it." Silara's expression didn't change, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. That was it. Ethan took a step back, crossing his arms. "This isn't just about your armor, is it?" Silara's gaze hardened. "Your task was to inspect, not question." Ethan let out a dry chuckle. "Come on, Commander. If I was just some technician, you would have had me look at the suit and leave. But you specifically wanted me, a human, to figure this out." He paused. "That means you don't trust your own crew with this." A heavy silence filled the room. Then Silara finally spoke. "You are correct." Ethan blinked. He hadn't expected her to admit it so easily. Silara turned to the Zurich officers and spoke in their deep, rumbling language. They nodded and left the command deck without a word. Once the doors sealed shut, she turned back to Ethan. "This ship is preparing for battle," she said. "Our enemies are waiting. I cannot afford weakness." Ethan felt a chill. A battle. No one had told him that. "But something is affecting me," Silara continued. "My body, my mind. It is difficult to explain." Ethan studied her carefully. "You think it's because of the armor?" "No." Silara's voice was quiet. "I believe it is because of you." Ethan's breath caught. "What?" Silara clenched her fists. "Ever since you arrived on this ship, I have felt different. The symptoms began shortly after your presence was made known. At first, I ignored them. But now my body resists my armor. My strength falters." Ethan's mind raced. Zurich warriors were known for their biological adaptability. Their bodies could adjust to new environments, new conditions, new species. Was it possible that something about him was triggering this reaction? His voice came out in a whisper. "Commander, what exactly do you think is happening to you?" Silara's violet eyes locked onto his, intense and unwavering. "I do not know," she said, "but if we do not find out soon, this ship may not survive what is coming." Ethan's mind was spinning. Commander Silara, a warrior feared across the stars, was standing before him, admitting that something was wrong with her body and that it had started after he arrived. It didn't make sense. Humans and Zirak weren't even the same species. They had different biology, different evolutionary paths. And yet, her armor rejected her. Her strength was failing. And somehow, she thought it had to do with him. Ethan swallowed. "You're sure this started when I arrived?" Silara nodded. At first, it was small, a slight disturbance. I ignored it. Her fists clenched. But today, during combat drills, I felt it clearly. My body is not reacting as it should. The armor is an extension of me, yet now it hesitates. It is delayed. A delay in combat could mean death. Ethan took a deep breath. "Then we need to figure this out. Fast." Silara studied him. "I require your assistance. You are the only variable that changed." Ethan wasn't sure how he felt about that. He was an engineer, not a doctor, but he was also the only human here. If something about him was affecting her, then he had to help. "All right," he said. "Let's start with the basics. What exactly are you feeling?" Silara was silent for a moment, then exhaled. "A strange heat in my chest, a pressure in my mind. And when I look at you, I feel it intensify." Ethan blinked. "Wait, what?" She tilted her head. "It is strongest when you are near." Ethan suddenly felt very self-conscious. "Okay," he said, rubbing his neck. "So something about me is triggering this. Maybe it's a chemical reaction, some kind of biological response." Silara frowned. "Humans are not known to affect Zirek biology. Our bodies do not react to foreign species in this way." Ethan thought for a moment. "What about the ship? Could there be something in the air systems? Maybe my presence is changing the environment in a way you're not used to." Silara considered this. Unlikely, but possible. The ship maintains strict atmospheric control. However, we have never had a human on board for an extended period. Ethan tapped his chin. "Then let's test it. I'll step outside the command room for a while. If your condition improves, then we know it's my presence." Silara nodded. "Agreed." Ethan turned and walked toward the exit. As soon as he stepped out, the heavy doors sealed behind him with a deep metallic thud. He exhaled and leaned against the wall. What was going on? The Zirak were one of the most powerful warrior species in the galaxy. Their bodies were nearly indestructible, their technology far beyond human capabilities. And yet something about him, a single human, was affecting their commander. His communicator beeped. Silara's voice came through. "The pressure is fading." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. So it was him. He took a slow breath. This was bigger than just a simple health issue. This meant something deeper was happening, and he had a feeling neither of them was going to like the answer. After a few minutes, his communicator beeped again. "Return," Silara's voice commanded. Ethan stepped back into the command room. Silara stood in the same spot, arms crossed. But as soon as he entered, her posture stiffened. Her breath hitched. Her hands clenched. Ethan froze. Her symptoms had returned immediately. Silara's violet eyes burned into him. "It is you." Ethan swallowed. "Okay. So now we know it's not the ship. It's something about me specifically." Silara nodded, "which means we must determine why." She turned sharply. "Follow me." Ethan hesitated but obeyed. Silara led him through the corridors, her pace brisk. Zirek soldiers they passed bowed slightly as she walked past, their gazes lingering on Ethan with curiosity. They entered a dimly lit laboratory. Ethan saw sleek machines and monitors filled with unreadable Xerec symbols. A single medical officer stood waiting, a tall, four-armed Xerec with a neutral expression. Celara spoke in her language, and the medic nodded. Then she turned to Ethan. "You will undergo a full biological scan." Ethan sighed. Figured as much. The medic gestured for him to step onto a circular platform. As soon as he did, a ring of blue light passed over his body from head to toe. The medic studied the results and blinked, then blinked again. Ethan frowned. What? The medic turned to Celara. "Commander, this is unexpected." Celara's expression didn't change. "Explain." The medic hesitated. "His biological field is resonating with yours." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "My what?" Celara crossed her arms. "A biological field is an unseen energy signature that all living beings possess. It is tied to our physical and mental state." Ethan's heart started beating faster. "And mine is affecting yours." The medic nodded. "It is not harmful, but it is disrupting your body's natural equilibrium. This has never been observed between a Xerec and another species before." Celara's fists clenched. "Which means we are dealing with something entirely unknown." Ethan exhaled. "Great, just what I needed." Celara turned to him. "Whatever this connection is, we must understand it before the battle begins." Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. "So, what now?" Celara's eyes locked onto his. "Now," she said, "we find out just how deep this connection goes." Ethan sat on the examination table, arms crossed, while Celara stood beside him, her expression unreadable. The Xerec medic continued scanning data on the glowing screen, his four hands working quickly. "So let me get this straight," Ethan said, rubbing his temple. "Somehow, my biological field is messing with yours." Celara nodded. "That is correct." Ethan sighed. "Well, that's just great. I didn't even know humans had a biological field until 5 minutes ago." The medic spoke up. "Every living being has one. It is usually stable, but in rare cases, two fields can interact. This should not happen between different species." Ethan looked at Celara. "So why is it happening with us?" The medic hesitated before answering. "There are only theories. One possibility is that your energy signatures are in sync due to an unknown factor." Ethan groaned. "So, basically, we have no idea." Celara's eyes narrowed. "Then we must find out." The medic nodded. "Commander, I suggest an isolation test. Keep a distance from the human for a set period, and then reintroduce contact. We must study how your body reacts over time." Celara crossed her arms. "Agreed." She turned to Ethan. "You will remain in a separate chamber for the next several hours. We will monitor any changes." Ethan sighed. "Fine. Not like I have anything better to do." Hours later, Ethan sat alone in a cold metallic chamber, staring at the ceiling. The room was empty except for a simple bed and a small screen displaying the time. At first, he had felt normal. But as time passed, something strange began happening. His chest felt heavy. A slight pressure built in his head, and his body felt restless, like he was missing something. Ethan frowned. Was this because of the connection? The communicator on the wall beeped. "Human." Celara's voice came through. "How do you feel?" Ethan hesitated. "A little off. Kind of restless." Silence followed. Then Celara said, "Interesting. I feel the same." Ethan sat up. "Wait, so the connection isn't just affecting you. It's affecting me too." "It appears so," Celara said. "The medic will analyze the data. For now, remain where you are." Ethan sighed. "Great, just what I needed." The next test. Hours later, Celara entered the chamber, standing just inside the door. The moment Ethan saw her, the pressure in his chest lessened. Celara's posture also relaxed slightly. Ethan's eyes widened. It's stronger when we're apart, but weakens when we're close. Scifi nodded. That is what the data suggests. The medic, who stood outside observing, spoke. This confirms a mutual biological reaction. Your energy fields are synchronizing and destabilizing when separated. Ethan rubbed his forehead. So what does that mean? The medic hesitated. It could be dangerous in prolonged combat situations. If either of you is injured or separated for too long, the effects could worsen. Scifi narrowed her eyes. Unacceptable. The battle is approaching. I cannot afford weakness. Ethan frowned. So what's the solution? The medic exhaled. You must stay close. The more time you spend together, the more stable the reaction becomes. Ethan blinked. Did he just say what I think he said? Scifi's expression darkened. Are you suggesting I remain near a human at all times? The medic nodded. It is the most logical solution. Ethan sighed. Well, looks like we're stuck with each other. Scifi crossed her arms, clearly not thrilled. Very well, she said. We have no choice. Ethan exhaled. This just got a whole lot more complicated. Ethan never imagined he would be forced to stay close to an alien commander just to keep both of them from feeling strange. Yet here he was, walking beside Scifi as she led him through the corridors of the Zirak warship. Scifi's posture was stiff, her arms locked behind her back. She hadn't spoken much since the medic told them about their biological synchronization. Ethan sighed. So what now? We just stay near each other forever. Scifi's sharp gaze met his. Do not exaggerate, human. This is temporary. The scientists are already researching a way to stabilize our fields. Right, and how long will that take? She hesitated for a moment. Unknown. Ethan smirked. Sounds like a long time. Scifi huffed but said nothing. She led him into a new room, larger than his previous chamber, with 2 beds on opposite sides. You will stay here from now on, she said. Ethan looked around. So, we're roommates now. Scifi's expression darkened. It is not by choice. Ethan chuckled and sat on the nearest bed. Well, at least it's bigger than my last room. He looked at her. You sure you'll be okay with this? Scifi crossed her arms. I am a Zirak commander. I adapt to all conditions. Ethan smirked. Yeah, but have you ever lived with a human before? She paused. No. Ethan stretched his arms. Well, get ready. Humans can be annoying. Scifi rolled her eyes and turned toward the door. Do not test my patience, human. A growing problem. Hours passed, and despite their efforts, the situation became worse. Scifi tried to work at her station, reviewing battle strategies, but she kept losing focus. Her body felt restless. Her mind wandered. Every time she moved too far from Ethan, she felt an invisible pull dragging her attention back to him. It was the same for Ethan. He tried reading a report the Zirak had given him about their upcoming battle, but the words blurred together. His mind kept drifting toward Scifi. He sighed and rubbed his face. This is ridiculous. Scifi, sitting across the room, glanced at him. You feel it too. Ethan nodded. Yeah. It's like my brain won't shut up about where you are. Scifi frowned. This bond is more disruptive than I expected. Ethan stood up. Maybe we should test it. Scifi raised an eyebrow. Test it how? He pointed to the door. Let's try walking away from each other and see what happens. Scifi hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. She stepped toward the door while Ethan moved in the opposite direction. The moment they crossed a certain distance, a strange pressure formed in both their chests. Ethan grabbed the wall. Whoa! Scifi clenched her fists. This is unpleasant. The further they moved, the heavier the pressure became. Then, suddenly, pain. A sharp, pulsing discomfort shot through Ethan's body. He gasped and stumbled forward. At the same time, Scifi winced, her breathing uneven. Enough, she ordered. They rushed back toward each other, and the pain immediately stopped. Ethan exhaled. Okay, that was not fun. Silara's expression was unreadable. This connection is no longer just an inconvenience. It is a weakness. Ethan nodded. Yeah. If something pulls us apart during battle, we're in trouble. Silara turned toward the communicator on the wall. We need answers. Now. The urgent meeting. Minutes later, the Xeric medic and several scientists arrived. They examined the new data and spoke among themselves in their native language. Finally, the lead scientist turned to them. We have confirmed your energy fields are becoming dependent on each other. Ethan crossed his arms. Yeah, we noticed. The scientist continued. We believe that if this continues, the effects will worsen. The separation pain may become dangerous. Silara's expression hardened. Then we must stop it immediately. The scientist hesitated. There is one possible solution. Ethan leaned forward. I'm listening. The scientist adjusted his data tablet. Your energy fields must be fully stabilized. The best way to do that is to synchronize them completely. Silara's eyes narrowed. Explain. The scientist cleared his throat. Right now, your fields are fighting for balance. If you fully synchronize, they will merge into a stable state, eliminating the negative effects. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And how do we do that? The scientist hesitated. Through prolonged exposure. The more time you spend together, the faster the process will complete. Ethan sighed. So basically, we're stuck together until our bodies figure it out. The scientist nodded. Precisely. Silara's fists tightened, but she took a slow breath. Very well. If that is the only way, we will do it. Ethan smirked. Guess you're stuck with me, Commander. Silara shot him a glare. Do not make me regret this, human. Ethan chuckled. Too late. But deep down, both of them knew. Something had changed, and there was no turning back. Ethan never thought his life would be tied to an alien commander. Yet here he was, stuck in the same room with Silara, both trying to figure out their next move. The Xeric scientists had made it clear. The more time they spent together, the faster their energy fields would stabilize. Until then, separating would cause discomfort, and possibly worse. Silara sat at her desk, reviewing battle strategies, but her usual sharp focus was missing. Her hands twitched slightly, and her gaze flickered toward Ethan now and then. Ethan sighed. You're distracted. Silara frowned. You speak too much, human. He smirked. And yet you still look at me every few minutes. Her jaw tightened. This connection is irritating. Ethan shrugged. Yeah, well, it's not exactly a vacation for me either. He leaned back on his chair. But if we're stuck like this, we might as well figure out how to make it work. Silara hesitated, then exhaled. Very well. What do you propose? Ethan stretched his arms. First, we stop acting like enemies. Silara raised an eyebrow. We are on opposite sides of this war. Sure, Ethan said, but right now we have a bigger problem. She remained silent for a moment. Then, finally, she nodded. Agreed. It was a small step, but Ethan knew it meant something. An unexpected attack. Just as they were beginning to settle into their uneasy partnership, a sudden explosion rocked the ship. Boom. The lights flickered, and alarms blared. Silara immediately activated the communication panel. Report. A Xeric officer responded. Commander, we are under attack. Unknown ships have breached the outer defense. Silara cursed in her language. Who dares attack us? Ethan quickly stood. It's not the humans, is it? Silara shook her head. No, your fleet is too far from this sector. Another explosion shook the ship. Ethan grabbed the wall for balance. Then whoa. The officer's voice returned, urgent. Commander, it's the Valkyrie raiders. They've boarded the ship. Silara's eyes darkened. Prepare all forces for defense. Ethan frowned. Valkyrie raiders. They are scavengers, parasites who attack both human and Zurich fleets to steal technology and resources. Silara turned to Ethan. They will kill everyone if we do not stop them. Ethan tightened his fists. Then let's stop them. Fighting side by side. The ship's corridors were already in chaos by the time Ethan and Silara reached the battle zone. Valkyrie raiders, tall, armored creatures with insect-like limbs and glowing red eyes, rushed through the halls, firing their plasma weapons. Zurich soldiers fought back, but the Valkyrie were brutal. They tore through defenses with ease. Silara activated her energy blade. The blue weapon hummed in her hand. Ethan grabbed a fallen soldier's plasma rifle and took position beside her. Silara gave him a quick glance. Do you even know how to use that? Ethan smirked. Guess we'll find out. The first Valkyrie lunged at them. Silara moved with precision and speed, slicing through the enemy's armor. The creature screeched and collapsed. Ethan aimed and fired. His shot hit perfectly, dropping another raider. More enemies rushed forward. Silara and Ethan moved together, as if their strange bond was guiding them. When one attacked Silara from behind, Ethan shot it before it could strike. When Ethan stumbled, Silara pulled him back just in time to dodge an attack. It was a perfect balance. Instinctive, seamless. For a brief moment, Ethan forgot that he was fighting beside his supposed enemy. Right now, they weren't human and Zurich. They were allies. The captain falls. The battle raged on. But then, a loud roar echoed through the corridor. A massive Valkyrie warrior stomped forward, its huge claws dripped with green blood. Behind it, the Zurich captain, Silara's second-in-command, collapsed to the floor. Ethan saw Silara's fists tighten. No. The Valkyrie warrior charged toward them. Silara roared in fury and sprinted forward. Ethan had no choice but to follow. They fought as one, dodging, striking, covering each other's backs. The massive Valkyrie swiped at Silara, but she ducked, slashing at its leg. Ethan fired at its exposed side, burning through its armor. The creature screeched but remained standing. Then, with terrifying speed, it swung its claw at Silara's chest. Ethan saw it too late. Silara. She tried to dodge, but the claw slashed across her side. She gasped and fell to one knee. Ethan's heart pounded. Without thinking, he rushed forward. He aimed his plasma rifle at the Valkyrie's face and fired. Boom! The creature collapsed. Ethan didn't even wait for it to stop moving. He rushed to Silara's side. She was breathing hard, pressing a hand to her wound. Damn it, Ethan muttered. Stay with me. Silara's eyes met his. Despite the pain, she smirked. You saved me. Ethan grinned. Guess we're even now. She chuckled weakly. Not yet. Ethan helped her up, his arm around her. The battle wasn't over. But something between them had changed forever. The battle inside the Zurich ship was still raging. Alarms blared, smoke filled the corridors, and the sounds of plasma fire echoed everywhere. Ethan held Silara up, her body weakened from the wound she had taken. But there was no time to rest. A group of Zurich soldiers rushed forward, weapons raised. Their leader, a tall officer with dark purple armor, looked at Silara with concern. Commander, you are injured. Silara gritted her teeth. I am still standing. Ethan shook his head. Not for long if we don't finish this fight. The Zurich officer gave him a sharp look. The Valkyrie have breached the engine room. If they sabotage it, this ship will be destroyed. Silara took a deep breath. Then we stop them now. She turned to Ethan, her golden eyes filled with determination. Human, fight with me one last time. Ethan smirked. Wouldn't miss it. The engine room assault. They moved quickly through the corridors, dodging fallen debris and scattered bodies. When they reached the engine room, the massive doors were wide open. Inside, A dozen Valkyrie raiders were planting explosive devices around the ship's power core. A deep growl rumbled from the largest Valkyrie, its red eyes glowing in the dim light. It was their leader. Silara gripped her energy blade. "Take them down." The battle erupted. Plasma bolts flashed through the air. Ethan fired shot after shot, his aim sharp and precise. Every time a Valkyrie tried to set an explosive, he took them out. Silara moved like lightning, cutting through enemies with deadly grace. Even injured, she was unstoppable. But the Valkyrie leader was strong. It swung its massive blade at Silara, forcing her back. She barely blocked in time, her arms shaking from the impact. Ethan saw the struggle and acted fast. He grabbed a fallen grenade, armed it, and threw it straight at the Valkyrie leader. Boom! The explosion sent the creature flying across the room. It hit the wall hard and stopped moving. The remaining Valkyrie, seeing their leader defeated, fled in fear. Ethan ran to Silara. "You okay?" She exhaled. "I will survive." The Zyrek soldiers quickly disarmed the explosives, securing the ship. The battle was over. A moment of understanding. Later, in the medical bay, Ethan sat beside Silara as a doctor treated her wound. "You fought well," she admitted. Ethan chuckled. "Coming from you, that almost sounds like a compliment." She smirked. "Do not let it go to your head, human." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Silara spoke again. "This war between our species, perhaps it is not as simple as I once believed." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean humans aren't just reckless savages?" She sighed. "And perhaps the Zyrek are not as cold and ruthless as you think." Ethan leaned back. "So what now?" Silara hesitated, then looked at him. "Maybe we find a new path." Ethan smiled. "I think I'd like that." For the first time since they met, there was no hostility between them. Just understanding. The end.